Atheist Nomads, episode 389. Special rant about the latest stuff.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to a special episode of Atheist Nomads. This week you get two special episodes. One of the things that I talked about with trying to loosen up the schedule, and I haven't pulled off doing that very well. And it's been because it's, when you have that habit of just getting it out on, trying to get it on Thursday, and then you loosen it up, and then, sometimes you get it out a little bit late. One of the goals I had was to be able to split up when there's stuff I really need to rant about, to just get out and do it, and not just hold off on that, and to separate out that from the interviews, since that could be useful for people to have the episodes of their interviews just be complete standalone. And with this week's main episode coming out on Thursday, it is a special episode with three women and me just serving as a producer. So putting a rant at the start of that would have completely derailed the point of that. And so I'm just going to do my own rant right now, which is going to bump that one from being episode 389 to 390. And so, don't be surprised if I do more stuff like this in the future. I'm going to play around with it, but one of the things that happened with last week's episode was, we did part of the recording before Wednesday's riot, and then we did the rest a few hours after it. And, when you're recording the same day as major stories like that, you miss details. And one of the details I'd missed is the statements that Trump and some of his cronies made. So here is some audio from the Trump rally that then turned into a mob that stormed the Capitol.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
So that's what Trump said. Have to be strong. When you tell a crowd to march down to the Capitol and that to be heard, they won't listen to weakness, so you have to be strong. That was Trump doing his standard wishy-washy language, doing basically that whole dog whistle thing that has been thrown around, where, he's got that perfected to where they know what the people listening all know what that means. That means go down and threaten to try to get Mike Pence and threaten to take him out to the gallows you've erected out in front of the Capitol to hang him. I'm not going to actually link them, but there are videos out there of some of the more disturbing parts of that, with the crowd chanting about hanging Mike Pence, and the guys with zip tie restraints getting ready to take as many members of Congress hostage as they could, with the computers that were stolen, with the Capitol Police that were severely injured, the one that died. I still haven't seen how many of them are in the hospital, because one of those videos I've seen, there was literally hundreds of people pushing on this guy who was stuck in this Capitol Police officer who was stuck in the middle of a doorway, and I'm amazed they didn't snap his neck, the way the guy at the front was grabbing a hold of his gas mask. That was an armed, horrible, terrible mob. Anybody out there who says that, it was a mostly peaceful protest is completely full of shit. And if you see anybody saying that, you definitely got my permission to tell them to fuck off, because that is not in good faith. Anybody who says that was a mostly peaceful protest or tries to compare it to the Black Lives Matter protest is not making that claim in good faith. These are people who are trying to distract from a failed coup attempt. And there's even people who say, it's not a coup. They weren't trying to overthrow the government. Well, yes, they actually were. This is not a normal coup, because of course it's not normal. We're dealing with fucking Trump. Nothing is normal with Trump. He can't even get a coup to be normal. But his term in the oldest in place republic still existing was coming to an end. And to stop the process that would cement in his replacement, and with the hopes of, capturing and killing a bunch of the people in Congress to leave a majority of people who would do whatever Trump says. That was absolutely a coup attempt, and it failed. So people who call it an insurrection, yes, it was. They were trying to overthrow Congress in an attempt to overthrow not only the Congress, but the next administration that's going to be taking over here next week. There was a coup attempt in trying to get rid of that election and overthrow the democratically elected Congress and overthrow the election. Anybody who says it was a protest, no. The days of calling stuff like that protests has to be over. A protest is when you have a group of unarmed people with signs trying to get attention. A riot is when you have people storming and destroying things. And a insurrection is when you have an armed group taking over a government building. I'm going to be doing a series for Dustin Off the Degree here soon about the Sagebrush Rebellion, because that's really, this is a lot of the stuff we're seeing is descended from that. And Ammon Bundy was contacted by the local media here in Boise about his thoughts on the coup attempt on last Wednesday. And he'd been up in the mountains for a couple of days, so he didn't hear about it till after he got home that evening. At least that's his alibi. And yes, he is sure that his quote unquote protests with a lot of armed people at the Idaho State Capitol was a inspiration for this. And yes, there was the one in Michigan before that. There have been ones in Oregon since then. But the Idaho Capitol actually has the benefit of being a very, basically a replica of the U.S. Capitol. So it was a much closer approximation of how to do that, how to break in. And with his protest back in July, they broke doors to get into the House Galley during that special session. They literally broke doors, shattering glass, breaking the doors so that they would open because they were locked, because it wasn't open to the public because of a pandemic. And when people try to change, and Ammon Bundy is also a great example of his Malheur National Wildlife Refuge occupation for, 6 weeks, I think? Anybody who called that a protest was trying to placate him and people like him. It's now 5 years later, or 6 years later, and what are people like him doing now? They're taking guns and storming Capitol buildings. Ammon Bundy has been keeping the spirit of the Sagebrush Rebellion alive into the 21st century, and it has exploded into the MAGA mess we have now. What he did at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was an armed insurrection, not a protest. What the armed group that took over the U.S. Capitol, that was an armed insurrection. It was not a protest. The armed group that got into the Oregon State Capitol last Wednesday, that was an armed insurrection, not a protest. The correct way to handle protests is you listen to them. And I hate to say it, but the correct way to handle an armed insurrection is with the military. You look at the news, there are at least 51 armed protests being planned starting January 17 and on through to the inauguration in every state capital and the U.S. Capitol. It's looking like Washington, D.C. should have at least 15,000 National Guard troops by that time, and probably another 10,000 federal police agents to provide security. I hope every state gets enough security, whether it's police or National Guard, to protect themselves from these insurrectionists. And we all need to remember that's the part that's important. Yes, Trump being held accountable for inciting a mob needs to happen. The most important thing is these mobs need to be taken care of, and they need to be stopped so that we don't have more. And then, of course, we need to talk about the social media side and the other quote-unquote tech companies. From Amazon Web Services to Stripe to the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Etsy, Reddit. If it is supporting Donald Trump or being used by his supporters to plan their armed revolutions, they keep getting shut down. Now, anybody who says, oh, that's horrible anti-conservative censorship, no. It is definitely not. If companies have the right to have a say on whether or not their employees have access to birth control, i.e. Hobby Lobby, then companies sure as hell have the right to not let their platforms be used to plan the follow-up to an armed insurrection. It's not that they're afraid that might happen. It's already happened. They're afraid it's going to happen again and don't want to be used for a second one to be planned because they already allowed one to be planned on their platforms. Like, we're talking some serious corporate guilt here that they really should have. Because they should have stopped this at least a month or two ago. But they've waited until people are dead and until an actual attempt to overthrow Congress has happened. And it is also worth noting that, like, Parler, which has been thrown out of the app stores and, the App Store and Play Store, and has been booted off of Amazon Web Services. They're suing Amazon. And one of their complaints is actually valid, that Amazon didn't give them the 30 days notice they should have. It's also valid that Amazon has pretty much a monopoly and antitrust presence on the internet. Those are both actually pretty valid. Amazon should have been started getting Parler off of their platform more than 30 days ago. So if anything, their complaint is valid because they were still on the platform. And the people who are claiming that we're losing free speech, and like even Mozilla is getting some flack from people saying that their statement that for us to have a free and open internet, we do need to have moderation that takes out hate and violence. That means, they're not in favor of free speech or an open internet. No, they absolutely are. They're in favor of a responsibly run open internet where the people who run platforms are responsible for the content on those platforms. I run several websites. I am responsible to make sure that the comments are fine. Don't get a whole lot of comments. Most of what comes in gets filtered out as spam, but every so often a comment comes in that's not appropriate and I delete it. The ones that are fine from our actual listeners, I leave. As somebody with a platform that has reach, I know that I have an obligation to make sure that the content that goes out on the show is up to standards. And when I ended up accidentally getting a interview scheduled with a flat earther, I didn't do it. There's actually now 3 interviews that I have stopped. A fourth that I wish I had stopped. And that's because I am responsible to make sure that the content on my site lives up to the standards that I set for my site. The same is true for bigger sites run by large publicly traded corporations like Facebook and Twitter. They have the obligation to make sure that the people that are using their site are following their rules. If they don't, they will have anarchy, literal anarchy. Free speech is not the same as anarchy, and free speech has never been unlimited. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, just like you can't plan a revolution on a social media site. That doesn't mean that some of these complaints some people are having about how this is being handled don't need to be discussed. That's a discussion that needs to be saved for after the violence has been stopped. Stay safe, stay informed, and please, if you are in a state capital or the U.S. Capitol, do not try to counter-protest. Stay out of the way of the police. Let them handle the protests that are going to happen. Or riots, depending on the case. So until Thursday, remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atheist Nomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.